Good evening. Welcome to UCSD GuestBook. I'm Charles Briggs, the director of the Center for Iberian and Latin American Studies here at the University of California, San Diego. Tonight, it is my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Jaime Aparicio Otero to UCSD. He is the ambassador from Bolivia to the United States. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here today and enjoy the hospitality of the University of California in San Diego.
Our pleasure as well. We have a lot of interesting things to talk about tonight, but first, some background in Bolivia provided by Laura Castañeda.
Bolivia has often been recognized as an Andean nation filled with great history, culture, and folklore. But recently, these virtues have been overshadowed by continuous political turmoil and social instability. For years now, Bolivia's indigenous communities have organized massive protests by closing down highly commuted roads used for the transportation of trade. Up to 2,500 trucks have been blocked by rocks and rows of human chains, while fruits and vegetables are left to rot inside the vehicles. Millions of dollars of trade are lost every day. Nonetheless, organizers say it's the only way to attract attention to their demands that have for so long gone unnoticed. They ask for a 50% tax on international natural gas exports so that the profits can be distributed among agricultural areas cultivated by the less privileged. Others question the restraints set on the growth of coca leaves after the U.S. Congress agreed to limit its relations with countries that sold coca. Evo Morales, who ran unsuccessfully for president in 2002, now symbolically leads these types of protests. He also heads Bolivia's Socialism Party that has long been one of President Carlos Diego Mesa's worst critics. The president, who has maintained supporters along the chaos, simply describes the tactics as economic suicide motivated by attempts of political sabotage. Because of the commotion caused by consistent protests, the country has had two presidents in less than 3 years, both of which have presented their letter of resignation to Congress. Mesa's attempt to withdraw in March of 2005, 2 years before his term's completion, was denied by the majority of Parliament. As one of South America's poorest countries, Bolivia's 8 million inhabitants have witnessed a series of dictatorships and land disputes since its independence from Spain in 1825. Torn by a defined separation between the elite and the impoverished of the country, both groups are now attempting to engage in what they inevitably have in common: their country.
The Center for Iberian and Latin American Studies here at UCSD has a mission to bring to audiences information on Latin America. We think it's particularly important at this time because Latin America has entered a period that is unprecedented in terms of its dynamism and its tremendous implications for the United States and U.S.-Latin American relations. Given the powerful connections created by globalization, and specifically the attempt to link countries in the Americas through free trade agreements, what happens in Latin America now has profound and immediate implications for people who live in the United States, and particularly for residents of the border region. One of the most dramatic developments in a number of Latin American countries has been a fundamental renegotiation of the relationship between the state, or the government, and the people. This has happened, for example, with the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, President Kirchner in Argentina, and President Lula in Brazil, and who have promised to defend the poor against the interests of multilateral lending agencies such as the World Bank, and also against transnational corporations. Now, what I'd like to know is what lessons can we learn from Bolivia about the power of people in reshaping governance in Latin America, Mr. Ambassador?
Thank you. I would say in the first place that Bolivia is, as you know, as many countries in Latin America, is a multicultural, a multi-ethnic, and a multilingual society. So in that sense, we reflect some of the problems that most of the countries in Latin America have. And what we are trying to do in Bolivia is to rebuild, as you were saying, a new social pact. We have to put together not only all our ethnic differences, but also our regional differences, and we have to reach some kind of new consensus for this new millennium in terms of finding common interests in the country. Bolivia is a country that has 60% of indigenous population, like Guatemala and a few countries in the region. We are societies that have a majority of indigenous population, and this population was excluded from the political system for I would say for more than a century. So what we are trying to do now is to open the system so everybody can participate, not only in politics but also in the economy of the country. And what you are seeing in many countries in Latin America is a transitional period. The system, these 20 years of democracy or 25 years of democracy in Bolivia had opened a much bigger space for participation for indigenous movements, but the state was not able to satisfy all these expectations that people had with this new wave of democracy in the region. So I would say that what we are going to see in the next months in many of the Andean countries and in Bolivia is the reshaping of the state and the relation with the different nations that live within our state. And I hope that when we have this constitutional assembly in the next months, we are going to agree in a new constitution that would include all these new realities in the political system and in the Bolivian state.
This is where you give those of us who are people in the universities who pretend to know something about Latin America a tremendous challenge, because all of the models that we learned as students have almost no applicability. What the term the state, government, civil society, they've all changed so much that we're really having to sweep away the old ideas and come to Latin America and try to really understand what's happening, what's unfolding before our eyes. It's a wonderful answer. I wonder if you could tell me, do you see any parallels between the popular resistance in Bolivia and the anti-globalization movement that we saw starting in Seattle and extending over the globe?
Yes, I would say that many people is trying to use Bolivia as a showcase in this global fight against globalization. It looks like contradictory, but it's true. Globalization has created also global networks that are fighting against the same phenomena. And Bolivia is one of the cases where people is trying to show that social movements are fighting against transnational companies and against the old system. But what it's also true is that Bolivia has to find his own path. We can't be part of this global fight because we have very peculiar problems that we have to deal with. And the first one is that Bolivia needs to find economic growth in the next years. The central problem in Bolivia and in Latin America is poverty and inequality. As you know, South America and Latin America are not poor countries, are unequal countries, unfair countries. And what we have to solve is the problem of unemployment and poverty. That's the first problem. So we have to generate economic growth. So from that perspective, what we need to do is to export our gas reserves. As you know, we have the second largest reserves of gas in thing. And we have to open our production, and we have to export in order to generate jobs internally and generate investment and incomes for the country. So that's why it's very important for us to have a free trade agreement with the United States. I know that's not popular in many countries and in many movements, but for Bolivia it's essential that we gain access to markets like the U.S. market, because, as you know, that's the only way we're going to solve the problem of unemployment and increasing productivity. But the other important issue in Bolivia is that FTA and a free trade agreement with the United States is opposed by many groups. But the surprise is that in the last election in El Alto de La Paz, the most difficult place because it's the place where you have all the marginal citizens that came from the countryside to the city, and they are living in the poorest conditions in the country. These people has voted for a mayor who was proposing in his campaign the access to the FTA as a way to develop the Alto de La Paz. So sometimes we read in the newspaper some kind of news that are also sometimes also contradicted by reality.
Well, I was going to ask you about the free trade area of the Americas potential agreement. And you gave some good sense as to how much the country is divided with respect to some of these issues. Do you see the emergence of a consensus as possible?
Well, there are two things. One is the free trade area of the Americas, that it's now going to be discussed at the end of this year in Buenos Aires in the next summit of the Americas, where all the 34 presidents of the Americas are going to be present. There are not there is no agreements there yet between some of the countries like Brazil or the United States in signing a treaty or a final agreement. But what we are trying to do now is to have a sub-regional agreement, the Andean countries to sign an agreement with the United States. At this moment, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru are negotiating an agreement. And we are observers, but we hope we are going to be members, we are going to be part of this negotiation in the next months. At the same time, as you know, the Central American countries have just signed an agreement with the United States that it's waiting for their approval in the US Congress. So I think those are the kind of agreements that would be in the next months would be in the center of the discussion, more than the FTAA.
In the United States, sometimes public awareness of Latin American countries seems to focus on a particular image for each individual country. And for a long time, one of the images that often came to the mind of American publics with respect to Bolivia was the cocaine production and the drug trade. And certainly also, traditionally, that has been one important focus of relations between the United States and Bolivia. Is this still the case? What do you think are the most important foci of relations between the two countries now?
Well, I think that has changed dramatically in the last years. I would say that even though it's still an issue in the relations between the Andean countries and the United States, I would say also that it's not the most important issue, that our agenda is much more diverse at this moment. I would say that in the first place, the most critical issue is democracy. Stabilization and consolidation of democracy in the Andes, I would say, is the first issue we have in our relations with the United States. And then we have other important initiatives like the free trade area, or the free trade Andean-US agreement. We have a new multilateral relations in the framework of the Organization of American States, in the framework of the Summit of the Americas. We are part of many projects that have to do with the institutional building in our countries, the fight against corruption, issues like and also we have a new multilateral approach to deal with the problem of the drug trafficking. And also it's important that people knows that Bolivia has did an incredible effort in coca reduction that was very costly for the country. We passed from more than 50,000 hectares to less than 5,000 hectares in the last 3-4 years. So that's one thing that has contributed to put this issue of the anti-drug and the drug trafficking problem in a different perspective. So I would say that we have a much broader agenda, and we are other issues are now the most pressing aspects of our relation.
Well, certainly you're the one of the key figures in negotiating those particular relations between the two countries as the Bolivian ambassador to the United States, so this is very illuminating. Jose Miguel Insulza of Chile, a few days ago, was elected as the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. My understanding is that Bolivia abstained in the final vote. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that decision and also just some sense of right now, what is the state of relations between Chile and Bolivia?
Well, it's Bolivia and Chile have no diplomatic relations at this moment. This has to do with an historical problem that we had when we lose our access to the Pacific Ocean in the Pacific War at the end of the 19th century. This is something that has affected the collective psychology of the Bolivian people. And it's a very strong, even though we had wars like every country at that time and we lost lands with other states, the fact that you lose your access to the ocean is very deep. And it's really something that it's not only in the governments or in the Bolivian leaders or in some social groups. It's something that affects the whole country. The whole collective psychology of the country is affected by this issue. So what we are proposing is to have negotiation with our neighbors, with Chile, to gain access to the Pacific Ocean. And while people is very interested in having this kind of relation with Chile in which we would solve this historical problem, the political conditions are not yet the best ones, and that's why in this election Bolivia has opposed Chile.
It seems that one of the areas in which Bolivia and the United States, the experience has converged in many ways in the last couple of decades is with the move to the importance of notions of multiculturalism. From the one hand, moving from the idea that everyone should assimilate to a common national experience to the idea that differences of ethnicity, of race, of culture are themselves positive and worthy of preservation. So I thought I might ask you a couple of questions about this that are related. First, have these multicultural and multilingual ideologies or ways of thinking shaped race relations in Bolivia? To what extent can we attribute the dramatic political events from October of 2003 right up through the present to issues of multiculturalism and racial difference?
Yeah, I would say that more than racial differences, what we have is socio-economic problems in the country. That as you know, the Bolivian economy was based on the mining sector, on the mining business, which is located in the Andean side of the country, in the high plateaus in La Paz, Potosí, Oruro. That was the economical center of the country. And what happened in the last years is that this the importance of the economy has moved to Santa Cruz, to the lowlands. And this region had, do you know, when we had this, Bolivia had, at the beginning of our democratic period, Bolivia had 1,000% of inflation on the 80s, on the mid-80s. And we had to pass through a very severe adjustment process that has stabilized our economy, and since then we have a very good and responsible macroeconomic balance in the country. But at that time, the people, the most affected people in the country were the people that were working in the mines, because one of the things that they had to close the mines. And these people moved to the Chapare, which is the area where they grow the coca, and they find in the coca, in the growing coca leaves, a way to replace their former jobs in the mine industry. So what happened is, during the Banzer administration some years ago, the eradication process has left again all these people unemployed, because we eradicate, as I said, more than 60,000 hectares in the Chapare. These people couldn't find a job. At the same time, we have in the whole region a dramatic recession because of the economic crisis that started in Asia and then in Brazil and finally in Argentina. That has affected Bolivia enormously. So in the midst of a recession, with the people unemployed and living around the big cities in Bolivia, you can imagine that this has created a social explosion. And finally, as you know, they overthrown the president of the republic in October of last year. So I would say that this is one side of the story, the socio-economic conflicts. But of course, in terms of ethnic conflicts, that's a more cultural problem. We have to have a new political system that opens the doors to all the ethnic groups, and they have to have a voice, and they have to feel that they are part of the same society. What happened is Bolivia was excluding most of these people. The different governments in the last 50 years had excluded a great majority of the Bolivians. And now we are seeing that from these 35 different ethnic groups that Bolivia has, Aymaras, Quichuas, the most important, but also in the Amazon side of Bolivia, are recovering their voice. And what's happening now is that they have now they became political actors. They have 30% of the Bolivian Congress now is in the hands of indigenous movements. And I think this is going to be a trend for the future. People and ethnic groups are going to recover their voice in the country. And that's positive for everybody, for the future of the country and for the future of our political system.
Good. Now, of course, these days, everyone talks about energy. Here in the United States, of course, the rising price of gasoline is a major concern. President Bush just noted that to be able to take care of this crisis, the possibility arose of drilling in natural refuge lands in Alaska, opening up new nuclear power plants, and creating new refineries. As you know, the San Diego-based Sempra Energy Corporation was slated as a major partner with Bolivia in the deal that would have exported Bolivian natural gas to the United States. What are the effects of including the people, just as you noted, actually in making basic decisions about energy policies? Is this bad for business but good for democracy?
Well, as Bolivia now, problem number one in Bolivia at this moment is the hydrocarbons law. Bolivia has passed from 3 trillion cubic feet of gas of reserves of natural gas in 5 years ago. Now we have around 56 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves. So we are a major player in the region. We have the second largest reserves on natural gas. And as you said, one of our projects was to export liquid gas, LNG, to California through Mexico. I hope that project is going to be part of our future relations with the United States, and it's going to help specifically California on solving their energy shortage problems. So we hope that that's going to happen. But domestically, what's happening now is it also has to do with history. Bolivia was during the Spanish occupation, we were producing silver. As you know, we had the largest reserves of silver in the world, and all that silver went to Spain, and we didn't receive anything. And in the historic memory of the people, there is this idea that people came from Spain to exploit the country, and they took all our wealthiness to Spain, and they are now very poor. And if you go to Potosí, that is the place where the Silver Mountain was located, you'll see that that's the poorest of the poorest places in Bolivia. And then it was the tin. We exported the tin for many years at the beginning until mid-20th century to Europe, and we had a few people that became millionaires and lived in Europe, and the country was still very poor, and the miners have this also memory of what happened with the mining sector. So now we have natural gas. And what people doesn't want is that the same thing happen with the gas. So what we have to find is the way that we have a new law that it's investment friendly, but at the other side, that it's also fair with the people, and that the incomes that these new exports of this vital resource would help people in solving their problems, in creating a society where everybody has equal opportunities, investing in education, health, infrastructure, that this time would be a different story, and that people would be really benefit from these resources. So that's what the president is trying to do, is trying to convince people that we need a law that at one side is good for attracting investment, but at the other side is good for the people.
We have much to learn from Bolivia in terms of how to reorient governments towards actually attacking questions of social inequality and poverty, and how to evolve a new form of democracy that actively involves the people in the operation of the government and its basic policies. We hope that we'll be able to keep looking forward to not only Bolivia's leadership and the great experiment that's going on there in terms of informing us about how it is, the nature of government and how it's changing, but also that we will be able to welcome you back to UCSD in the future so that we can continue this dialogue.
Thank you very much.
It's been a great pleasure and an honor speaking with you, Mr. Ambassador. My guest has been Ambassador Jaime Aparicio Otero, the ambassador from Bolivia to the United States. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us here at the Center for Iberian and Latin American Studies and UCSD in the UCSD Guestbook. I'm Charles Briggs. Good night.